had an opportunity to go out to the Payne lockpick village. Let me phrase it that way. Has anybody gone out there? Awesome. Did anybody learn to pick a lock for the first time today? Look at that. That's awesome. Is that the coolest experience ever? Well, one of the coolest experiences ever. Like that? So we definitely got lots of fun stuff to do today, from all the giveaways that we're doing, all these great talks, the Payne lockpick village. Don't forget about the Capture the Flag event going on. So lots of great things to do today, in addition to all these great talks. So I want to say thank you once again to all of our sponsors, especially Georgia Reach University. So if you see Joanne Sexton, please make sure you say thank you for all of her work in making this event happen, and especially making this great facility happen for us. So our next talk is called Doomsday Preppers APT Edition. It's got to be a great talk because it's got APT in it, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Payne.
Alright, thank you guys for having me. I've recently learned this is a fire talk, so get ready for a shotgun blast of information. It's about an hour-and-a-half talk, and I'm going to cram it into a third of that. Like I said, I'm Tanner Payne, and I've been working for Mandy at FireEye for a little over 3 years, and the title of my talk is around prepping for Doomsday, and this relates to some work I've recently done with some clients, and it focuses on shedding old habits of sim-related log collection and what actually needs to be collected versus how useful and how bloated it is. So I want to just go over some methods and give you some ideas on what to collect for facilitating detection and investigation. So before we get started, just to clear the air, apparently there is another T-Payne out there. We're not the same person, we're not even related, I've actually never met him, but we do have a few things in common. We both have Twitter handles, we like to keep it real. I don't know what he tweets about, but I'll be tweeting the link to these slides as well as some supporting information. Okay, stockpiling for survival. So I've kind of made a light comparison between these two things here. So preparing for the end of the world. A lot of you have seen this show called Doomsday Preppers on National Geographic, and it revolves around they profile these whack job individuals or groups that stockpile food, water, weapons for some upcoming scenario of disaster, the end of the world as we know it, or Teotihuacan, or Shift, or there's several different names for it. But at the end, they grade these people on how they prepared for a certain scenario and how effective it would be. On the other hand, on the right, we've got preparing corporate enterprise preparing for an APT incident. It's kind of the same thing. They're stockpiling logs, events, alerts in order to facilitate some unlikely scenario that you can't really predict. So wouldn't it be nice if we could grade these guys on a similar basis that these Doomsday Preppers get graded on? So what are the common challenges to preparing this? First off, most just don't prepare at all. And this, whether it's due to ignorance is bliss or perceived resource limitations, they basically do nothing. So in the real world, that would be, I lock my front door at night, I carry a glass of water up to bed with me in case I get thirsty, and just common sense. In the corporate world, that would be, I've got a firewall, I've got antivirus, maybe I collect some logs, maybe I look at them from time to time, but again, bare minimum. Next, many of those who do try, it's an utter failure. So a lot of these Doomsday Preppers, they go through all this, they spend time, money, effort, and prepare, and then they just get ripped to shreds when they're analyzed. On the corporate side, that would be actually collecting things, collecting all this information, all this data, logs, and then when it comes to actually using them, they've been collecting the wrong stuff, or it's inaccessible in a timely manner and can't be used for investigation. So third, fortunately, there is strategic hope. So this picture is a guy named James Wesley Rawls, who's probably one of the most infamous preppers in this recent time. He has a few books out. He's got a website called survivalblog.com, and he lays out these different scenarios of what you can actually do in a real world to prepare for these disasters. On the corporate side, this would be really focusing on collecting the right information, having it accessible, and going from there, but there's really no way to apply it until something actually happens. So what I want to focus on from here is collecting the right things. How do we do that? So my approach is starting with a model. So there's a lot of models out there. Everybody hopefully knows kill chain. It's probably the most popular. It's been around for almost 10 years. Another one is MITRE's attack matrix, and it's more of an interactive, searchable type model. And next is the Mandiant attack lifecycle model. So what we're going to do is take that model and then find common observable actions that occur at each stage of the attack lifecycle. Things like credential dumping, internal or reconnaissance, lateral movement, on and on. And then from there we want to identify data sources that capture those actions. So these data sources need to be existing or obtainable, so they're already being generated on the network, or they can easily be obtainable through configuration changes or adding sensors. Next, they need to be easily interpretable, so minimal amount of hex codes that need to be translated or arbitrary NIDs that need to be correlated, and last, they need to be self-sufficient. So within one data source, minimal requirement to correlate between multiple events within that same data source. Good example of something that's not very self-sufficient, Windows DNS logs. A lot of times you need to correlate between multiple events in order to get the source IP, the resource they're requesting, and the associated response. So what I want to do is go back up to these models and contrast two of them. So first is the kill chain. It's really focused on early detection in the pre-compromise stage. And detection is difficult at that stage, at the pre-compromise, and it really requires a mature intel shop in order to be able to detect this recon weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation stages. So I'm not knocking the kill chain model at all, but it's really focused on a different area. So on the other hand, we've got the Mandiant attack lifecycle model, which almost oversimplifies that pre-compromise stage into one just initial compromise. But after that, it really expands on what happens after the compromise and breaks down that stage by stage. So in a way, it almost assumes compromise. And what it allows us to do is understand that in that initial compromise, there's a huge vector of options as far as methods of attack, methods to get initial control of a host. But once an attacker has a control of that host, they've got somewhat finite options as far as how to carry out their mission. So what we want to do is exploit that set of attacker needs once they have control of a host. So remember that multicolor pyramid that we all had to learn in elementary school, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We can kind of apply that to what's happening here. So once control is established, an attacker is going to need certain things. They're going to need orientation. They're going to need to understand where they have landed in an environment, what they're after and where it is, and then the optional paths in order to get from A to B. They're also going to need credentials. So in order to get from A to B, they're going to need credentials and access to get there. And these can be effective credentials, what was involved in the initial compromise. That can be local credentials, what's available on the local host that they have, or that can be remote, what's immediately accessible within an enclave. And last, they need tools to carry out the rest of the mission. These can be exogenous tools, things they have to pull down after they have control in order to carry out the mission, or they can be endogenous, so things that are on a host that are available and can be used in a malicious sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Mandiant model and take it through stage by stage and identify some, try to understand what's going on at the stage, give some indicators that may capture this activity, and identify some data sources that may capture these individual indicators. So let's start with the initial compromise. The goal here is to gain initial access to a system. It's usually going to involve some combination of vulnerability, an exploit, and a user-initiated action. And whatever that may be, it's going to boil down to causing a machine to execute arbitrary code. Now, just to stop here, you see I've divided the data sources into 3 logical silos. We've got network, host, and infrastructure. The initial stage is going to have some vertical traffic through an egress point, so the network stage is going to, or the network silo is going to be pretty important. So for initial compromise, there's a diverse set of data sources we could use to capture some of this information, and it really depends on your architecture. Sometimes a firewall log is going to actually capture a domain and a source IP and some supporting information. So we see at the top under firewall, we've got a checkpoint firewall logging those things. Other environments, the firewall may be layer 3 only, so we've got to go to proxy logs that may be an authoritative source for domain activity. So at the top, we see under web proxy, we've got blue code proxy SG at the top, logging domain source IP, and also we have Cisco Ironboard log, basically logging the same thing. And other environments are going to have to rely on DNS logs. And again, we've got a bind DNS log at the top, and we have a row DNS log right below it, virtually logging the same useful data. Next is establish a foothold. So an attacker here is going to seek more reliable control of a host. So that means they may migrate into a more stable or reliable process on a host and pull down additional tools they need to complete the mission. And once they do that, they're equipped for the rest of the mission. So useful data here is can be Windows firewall activity, which is in the security log 5025. May not be useful on its own, but if you combine that with some basic service operations, like 7036 from the system log, which has logged here an odd-looking service that's entered the running state, use these, combine these two together, and it may show a pattern of attacker activity. Next is escalate privileges. So the goal here is to collect artifacts used for authentication. So these can be hashes, tickets, they can either be cracked or passed. And the goal or the result would be to gain authority and move freely within a network or within a system. So notice that the network silo is pretty much out of play here. The control has been established. Privilege escalation or credit dumping is going to be carried out on the host or from host to host in the lateral sense. So this is a good example of data source's relative value. It may be extremely important in detecting the initial compromise, but it may be, once C2 is established, it may be irrelevant for detecting privilege escalation. So here we have the execution of credential stealing tools. This can be detected by file name, image name, MD5, but it really, this is a stage that is most tool reliant. So there's a lot of tools already out there that can be downloaded and used. Windows Credential Editor, PW dump, GSEC dump, things like that. They're often seen in this stage. And through process creation, actually it's a sysmon event. If we can log the file and hash and the associated data. Next is internal recon. So the idea here is to get oriented with the victim's environment and have a better sense of where they need to go. This is often involved with using native tools that are already on the Windows system, and the attacker's goal is to get a better understanding of the environment. This is often referred to as living off the land. So the example here we have collected by Windows process tracking logs is First, they use the net command to run a net group domain controllers / admin. So this can be run by any user with domain user credentials, no elevated credentials needed. Next, he runs a net time whack Windows 2008 AD server. So they've got the list of domain controllers, picked one that they want to focus on, run a remote command to give me the current time on the domain controller, and then next you see command.exe that's calling task list.exe and piping the output to a log file. So this is, they've probably identified domain controllers, got what time it is, scheduled a task that's a little bit into the future, and told that task to run task list, which is also a endogenous tool on a server workstation, and piped it out to a text file. So now you've got all the tasks running on a domain controller. You can use that to find something that's that's exploitable, or use that to hide behind something that we know is running on the system. Next is to move laterally. They want to navigate towards the target from A to B and use the valid credentials they've gained in earlier steps in order to map drives, transfer files, and access other hosts. So this is, the result would be to close in on the target and the associated data. Here I focused on map drive activity. So by enabling net logon service debug logs on a domain controller, it logs to a text file any interaction with the net logon service. So in this example, if you are moving or mapping a drive from host A to host B, passing in certain credentials, if host B has never seen those credentials and has them cached, then it will query the net logon service in the domain controller, and it will give you a one-liner showing the credentials used, the source host, and the destination host. Definitely useful here. And that the OXO return code means that the map drive was successful. There's also another hex code that will show if it's failure. Next is to maintain presence. This is to ensure persistent access to targets over time, and this actions can include spreading backdoors among multiple hosts or pivoting to valid remote access. And the idea here is to maintain access, given that they've already spent a lot of time and resources getting to this point. The last thing an attacker wants to do is do something potentially noisy and get identified and remediated, and then they're back to step one. So they could be spreading backdoors to multiple hosts, pivoting to remote access, web shells, etc. So here we show scheduled task activity. Here it's captured by sysmon, and they're using the at.exe tool, which is a legacy carryover from the Windows XP days, and it's a way to leverage the Windows task scheduler to schedule local or remote tasks. So here they've run system32 evil.exe on a remote host. The other option that I have is app locker, which can really log some good information about evidence of execution. So app locker being something that's somewhat difficult to implement. You have a policy, you implement it, it inadvertently blocks something that needs to be run. So they have this app locker audit mode, which is for testing your policies, but it also is a great data source of looking at anything that's being executed. So in this case, we have conhost.exe being run from the environment variable system32 conhost.exe. We also have the same thing being run from windir. So that translates to seed Windows system32 task or conhost, or seed Windows conhost, which may not stand out on its own, but if you are looking at hundreds or thousands of workstations or hosts and you you see this one instance of clone host running from a different directory as the other ones, it immediately stands out as something to look into. Last is complete mission. So the idea is to extract the targeted data from the victim's network, and they do this by staging, compressing, encrypting, and transferring files out of the network. And the end goal is to actually take possession of the data they've identified. So you see the network data sources have come back into play. So another example of relative value. During some of the middle stages, the network was irrelevant. Now, since there's data actually moving vertically and leaving the network, they're back into play. So we're focused here on things leaving a network, and this can be captured as suspicious connections or suspicious file types. So at the top we've got bro FTP logs showing FTP connection to an external IP address and the internal IP associated. Hopefully you're not allowing external FTP connections, but if they are allowed, then this is useful data to have. And also suspicious file types. So in this case, we have bro files that's logging information about files traversing a sensor. And one of the most useful fields within this is the MIME type. So the MIME type will show roughly what type of file it is. So in this case, it's a RAR leaving the network, which kind of is not normal in everyday activity. All right, pulling it all together. The ideal scenario would be to decorate all these stages with useful data sources that facilitate detection as well as investigation. Detection helps you identify the stage of the attack because you strategically selected data sources based on a stage. Once you detect, you can peg it to a stage and then use the adjacent stages to more or less walk the model and identify additional attacker activity. And to leave you with this, many data sources are already present within the system. They just may not be collected, and others are just a matter of configuration. All right, I appreciate your time, and I'll turn it back over.
Great talk.